Hello and welcome to the AsiaInfo sponsored Analysys Mason webinar, where we're going to discuss the results of a survey which we carried out with some communication service providers on big data and their attitude towards their current systems and their readiness for that for some of the applications which are coming down the line. I'm Justin Vanderland. I'm a program head at Analysys Mason, and I deal with the analytics software program, which addresses the analytics requirements for telecoms technologies and other aspects of the market. I've also got Dr. Andy Tiller on the webinar, who heads up the VP Product Management for AsiaInfo, who is responsible for the development and marketing of the AsiaInfo products that address big data applications in the market. Hi. The webinar will discuss some of the survey results and draw on some of the conclusions that we drew from them, and end with an interactive Q&A. So please use the Ask the Questions tab on the left-hand side of the screen to ask your questions, and we'll cover those at the end of the call and go through those in detail. So please keep asking your questions. We haven't forgotten you. We'll get to those at the end of the webinar. So we're going to break the webinar down into three areas. We're going to look at the scope of telecoms and the big data applications as they stand today. We're going to do a focused look at the monetization of those applications and give some examples of those, which Andy will be going through, and looking at some of the barriers and how those are being overcome by the big data monetization technologies at the moment. And Andy will be covering some of those, and be covering off these with some input from the survey which we've already talked about. So the first of these is looking at the scope of the telecoms big data applications. So big data analytics solutions address a number of the CSP demands, that's communication service providers demands, which really break into three areas. The first one really is looking at supercharging their current operations. So there are plenty of operational systems in play today within telcos, and the ability to improve those either through doing them quicker, faster, in terms of completing their process, and doing so better quality and possibly cheaper than they've done before, is absolutely critical in one of the use cases, or many of the use cases, which big data is used for. The other one really is expanding their current revenues, and we'll come on to some of those applications and use cases further down the webinar. But that's really about being able to sell more of the new services to the current subscribers which are in play. And finally, looking at some of the new revenues which can be derived from the use of analytics. Those include things like mobile advertising, as well as monetizing some of the data itself. Critically, all this has been around for some time. We've certainly seen the use of enterprise data warehouses in the market for some number of years. So what's really changed? And there's been some enablers which have really changed the market space in the last few years. Critically, it's been the falling cost of data storage and the power that you can now apply to some of the issues and problems which have been come to the market. And secondly, the increasing availability of data, not just from the wide use of smartphones and other technologies, but also from the network itself. So those two things combined enable, along with some new technology in terms of the software, are enabling some of these applications to be moved towards nearer real time in terms of delivery of that information back and being able to be used. But actually critical in terms of the use cases, and we'll come on to some of those later in the presentation. So one of the debates which goes on within the environment, there are two critical technologies. On the left-hand side, if you like, there are plenty of big data platforms, which are essentially generic and general purpose. They can be built to use any number of different use cases, and there are plenty of those out there in terms of the key players like SAS and IBM, HP, and others which are in play today, who provide a very open and the ability to be utilized for any number of different use cases. The issue with doing that, of course, is that there is some effort involved in building specific use cases for particular requirements. And so the counter to that, of course, are these appliances, which essentially have a quicker-to-market delivery mechanism in terms of having an application approach, which is tied directly to the hardware and provides an ability to deliver those applications quicker, faster, and cheaper than doing it with a generic platform. Of course, there are some downsides to that as well. In a sense, they're less flexible, but that's got to be weighed up against the speed at which those products can come to market and the skills and requirements needed to both deliver those and support them. And we'll come on to some of those applications later on. One example of those, of course, is the Veritas C3, which we'll have some details on a little bit later on in the presentation, which is supplied by AsiaInfo. Now, of course, analytics can be applied to a rich set of use cases. And in fact, we've broken these down into 6 major areas. And they cover pretty much every single aspect of an operator today. There is a strong emphasis, of course, within analytics to be based around both marketing and sales, upsell, and segmentation activities, but increasingly other areas of operations and these new services, which are depicted on the right-hand side here, of digital data services, where new revenues are also being derived using the same technology. We've broken these 3 things into essentially 3 areas, which are essentially covering off the areas we talked about on the first slide, which is looking at supercharging current operations, i.e. doing what you do better, quicker, cheaper, and faster. We've got looking at areas which are expanding current revenues. Those things addressing of upsell, cross-sell, and all those sort of things. Essentially all about trying to do what you do today better in terms of deriving more revenues from your current service stack. And the green ones are really looking at the new revenue types, the sort of mobile advertising, the end-to-end monitoring, etc., and various other services which are selling that data and data services to third parties. Those ones are obviously more exciting, but the reality is that most of the revenues I think we're going to derive from, CSP is going to derive from these activities, are really ought to be orientated around doing what they do currently better and expanding current revenues. And we'll see some of these reflected in the slides we come further down the line. So looking at the first of our survey results, which looked in the short term at some of the big data advantages, and the question being asked was, how would you rate the potential value contributed by big data in the near term? And some of this writing is quite small, and I do apologise for that on the right-hand side, but I'll go through maybe some of those answers just to spell them out if you can't see them clearly. The top section looks at additional revenues from selling, cross-selling services via your content-aware marketing systems. The second one is opening new business areas by providing context-aware marketing to third parties. So it's opening up to the more digital services type offerings. The third section is looking at improving customer care through predicting customer issues. The fourth one being verifying or ensuring that the promised customer experience is being delivered. And the final one is just other. And they're broken into different sections, which these sections are the same for the following slide as well. The top greeny section is actually very low. The top, the right-hand Y is very high. So a couple of observations from this, and I would say that the survey was carried out by about 30-odd CSPs around the European and global market space. So it's fairly representative. I would say that these are probably larger CSPs than smaller ones, just in passing. So just a couple of observations. First observation is this, is that if you look at the bottom line there, that there was still some considerable, I'd say, confusion as to what the best move is for big data in the very short term. Most people here are putting a strong emphasis on we really don't know and placing another, which I suppose is just a reflecting of trying to people understand exactly what business value they're going to derive from big data in the very short term. Having said that, the ability to improve customer care seemed to be an issue, and felt that all that data and particularly sort of CEM kind of approaches to improving that customer care is going to be quite critical in terms of improving things in the short term. And that was the sort of I suppose the observation out of the first one. The CEM one was much the same, and the top end one, which was the one which was additional revenues from selling, cross-selling services, was actually marked pretty high as well. even though there seem to be some dissenters from that. And digging a little deeper, I think you'll find that that is because they had quite sophisticated systems in play today. So there was some, I suppose, concern that maybe that wouldn't be it wouldn't give the most advantage in the shorter term. But the conclusions are that apart from the concerns over how they're going to use big data, is that there are these areas we've marked out. Certainly 3 of them out of the 4 areas look quite significant in terms of people, even in the short term, looking at some value from this area. So comparing that with the longer term, the confusion still remains, but it's somewhat less, which is, I guess, somewhat unsurprising than it was in the past. But I will say that overall, there is less dissension in terms of people being uncertain or unsure about how they would use this. In fact, all the categories which are listed here are far more likely, or they're more less don't knows and more highly regarded in terms of each one of these areas in the longer term. So across the board, I think the conclusion we can come from that perspective is that the big data in the mid and longer term has been seen to add value in all these spaces, and at least that's one sort of critical thing. Context-aware marketing came out to be sort of, I suppose, more than it was in the shorter term, and customer care-based applications and CM are still, of course, extremely likely to take place. So I think overall there's quite a significant difference there. The dissenters definitely dropped away. So that was the sort of conclusions of those 2 questions in the shorter and long term. If you move to, a little bit of a bit more detail, I'm just prepping up the next section, which is why is monetization so important to operators? Which is, of course, one of the big drivers in terms of any activity. Trying to save money is one aspect of a CSP, but in terms of generating new revenues, tends to get projects far easier than cost-cutting ones. But we are seeing some key things here. Certainly, I suppose this is no news to anybody, but the decline in traditional revenues is driving a need for new revenue streams. So the ability to monetize what you've got today is absolutely critical. The need to add value to over-the-top players and providing, either cooperating with them or providing some value add working with those over-the-top players is going to be absolutely critical. And providing data to do that is one of those aspects of it. Having greater insights than over-the-top players, of course, is when we're competing with them. So understanding your data and having a greater and more fuller data set than the over-the-top players is one way of providing a value add over and above to various partners and indeed to yourselves and for your own usage that over-the-top players would struggle to do. And of course, you get a complete view from that. And the example here, of course, Spotify doesn't know anything about NATs to customers and vice versa. But of course, the operator can do that. He knows, basically has the ability to know what's going on completely on the network. So, the over-the-top players are not all alike. And the point there is that Google has a great customer knowledge and loads of applications, but small application companies really don't have that. So you've got to be the ability to add some value to those characters or compete against them is something operators should be able to do. So we're just going to go to the next section, which is focusing a little bit more on this monetization issue and some application examples. I'm going to hand over to Andy now, who's going to pick up.
Thanks, Justin. So we can see that operators are already monetizing their customer insights from big data analytics, and this slide shows some real-world examples and maps them against 2 factors. So the first factor is the degree of real-time versus offline analysis which is needed, and the second factor is the granularity of the segmentation. In other words, how much personal information is used in the analysis. So SFR, for example, is using location information to track crowd movements, such as the paths taken by spectators away from stadiums. And this is valuable for transport planning, but can be completely anonymous and doesn't need to be analysed in real time. Telefónica's Smart Steps service also tracks footfall, for example, in city centres, so that advertisers and retailers can find the best place to put their ads and products. And this is still offline anonymous analysis, but Telefonica does include some customer profile data so that the analysis is more powerful and can target specific market segments. Verizon's precision offering goes a step further and provides marketers with access to specific microsegments for marketing campaigns based on customer profile information. And in this case, the analysis still doesn't need to be real-time. But by contrast, an app which does need to be real-time is recording current traffic information. Where are the traffic jams right now? So, for example, Vodafone and other operators track the locations and velocities of the mobile phones on their network for TomTom to improve the accuracy of its traffic status information. This does require real-time analysis, but of course it can be completely anonymous. So an example where both real-time analysis and fine-grained segmentation is used is China Mobile, where they're using big data analytics for targeted context-aware marketing campaigns. So let's take a look at that example. So this slide shows the one of China Mobile's use cases. It's a service for promoting to car buyers. So people want to buy a new car. China Mobile has partners that provide a service which allows people to see car reviews and prices, and that's sold through their digital services portal. So the user experience for the marketing campaign here is a bit like internet search advertising, except it's from China Mobile rather than Google, and it works with any search engine. So when Steve types the relevant search terms into the search engine on his phone, he receives a push message prompting him to try the car buyer's report service. So when promoted via a traditional marketing campaign without the real-time context awareness, China Mobile was seeing click-through rates to the target market that they were focusing on of about 1.5%. That's perhaps similar, a little bit less than typical search ads, internet search ads. But using real-time context awareness, sending the ad at the exact moment when Steve's interested in thinking about buying a new car, the click-through rate increases dramatically to over 4%. Now, there is a cultural context here. This app might not be socially acceptable or even legal in some markets, but the technology can be used in a variety of different ways. So I'll explain a bit how that works. The actual technology is the Veris C-Cubed product, which Justin mentioned earlier. So let's see the example. So the first task is to capture the customer data which is needed to define precise target market segments as a subject for campaigns based on customers' data usage patterns and behaviours. So in principle, operators know everything their customers are doing on the network, but they need to turn the data packets into useful insights. And this is where real-time big data analytics comes in. Using a big data stream computing platform, what we call the context awareness engine, China Mobile can process all of the signaling and user data packets from both its mobile and its Wi-Fi network on the fly and convert that into meaningful data behavior insights, which it records in a database. In other words, they create records of which subscribers are accessing which content and which applications on which devices, when and in which locations. So and typically they will store perhaps 2 months worth of historic data. They also combine that with customer profile information from the business support systems to create a valuable database of recent data which can be mined to extract very precise target market segments. So the next step in this process is to actually define the target market for a campaign. And this can be very specific indeed. I've been deliberately over-specific here, but just for illustration purposes. But for example, the operator could mine the database for male customers aged between 15 and 30 with high ARPU and high data usage who use a music application on their smartphone and have either visited a website or searched for a term associated with a particular music band or music genre. So what happens here is that the specific target customer segment can be mined from the database and turned immediately into the subject for a marketing campaign. Next step in the process is, of course, to define the campaign. Here we go. And to set up some real-time rules for when the campaign is actually executed. So a traditional campaign would normally just, once it's defined, just send an SMS or a WAP push message to every member of the target customer group, and when that and just do that immediately, process through them all. But with this approach, what happens is that the operator can define some trigger rules which ensure that the message is delivered at an appropriate time, hopefully the perfect time when the customer is receptive. It's very annoying to get an ad or a marketing campaign, even if it's relevant to you, if you're busy with something else or you're asleep. So in this case, the campaign can be delivered according to some rules. So it might be when the customer is listening to music on their phone with an app, or maybe even in a specific location where the offer makes most sense, because perhaps there's a free trial. So that's how the thing works. The real-time context awareness engine comes into play again as it's processing all of the data from the network. It can identify these contexts as and when they arise for a particular customer, and at that point it can then trigger the campaign. So the campaign is delivered at the ideal moment when the context is right. So, and that's of course how Steve, in our previous example from China Mobile, received the campaign at just the right moment. But the music example is a little bit more sophisticated because there are more rules. So let's imagine for a moment that an operator has partnered up with a music streaming company such as Spotify, and they've created a great offer for music fans, and they've made this free for anyone who's attending a music festival. Example here is in Denmark, the Roskilde Festival, and Metallica's playing for the first time, or played this year for the first time for many years. So perhaps the promotion is around free downloads of Metallica tracks. So what happens here as the user experience is that when customers at the Roskilde Festival open their music app on their phone, they get this unbeatable offer from Super Operator and Spotify. The way that works is that, first of all, the target customer group is defined based on two types of data. First of all, the static data from the business support systems, customer profile data, so we can target people with smartphones with high data ARPU and in the right demographic. But more interestingly, there's the data behavior insights. So we can find people who use music apps on their phone who are interested in a particular music band or genre. And then, so that defines the target customer group, and then a real-time campaign trigger is set up so that the operator can send the campaign automatically when the right context arises. So we want to not do it when people are asleep, so we can remove the time segment. We want to do it when people are at the Roskilde Festival, because that's when the offer is particularly valid. It's free then. We only want to do it when people are listening to music on their smartphones. So these are the kinds of triggers that can be set up. Back to you, Justin.
So thanks, Andy. So as part of going back to the survey and sort of looking at some of this very specific technology in terms of this context-aware marketing activity, we took the time to ask the question, basically, how would you rate your readiness for your organization to leverage big data for context-aware marketing campaigns and for upsell and cross-sell for your own services, and took the respondent from that. So key points here is that context-aware big data functionality is being implemented already. About 40% of the respondents said they had a commitment to go with live projects today, which is quite a significant amount. And then furthermore, the 30% were considering or planning stage to do this. So I suppose one of the questions which I get asked, which is, is this stuff for real? It very much is. The significant amount of the market is already moving in that direction. certainly aware of the capability of marketing and using big data and all those data attributes which Andy talked about, which can be married up with other aspects of usage data to come up with an extremely powerful proposition in terms of selling services and upselling what they currently deal with. And I would say that CSPs are presumably pretty much in a unique position to be able to do this. And so the assumption is, of course, that this will become more the norm than the bleeding edge in terms of what goes on within the market space. And we would anticipate over the years that over the next couple of years that this would be a system which most operators would be adopting. So, and of course, the key thing about all of this is staying aware and staying ahead of what your competitors are doing within the market space. It's a critical bit of the arsenal to enable you to do that. So we're coming on to the third topic, which is going to kind of look at the overcoming of the barriers of using big data for monetization. And one of the key and critical issues in this is the privacy issue, and it comes up pretty much every time in terms of either actual issue with the privacy or perceived issue with it as well. And so we asked the question of the survey, what are or what were the barriers for using big data analytics solutions for context-aware marketing in your business? The first one was lack of funding or business case, which is quite critical, and we'll come on to that maybe in a second. The necessary technology, is that in play? The necessary technology is not available on the market. The privacy issue, which I've already mentioned, regulatory constraints, don'ts or others. As I said before, the privacy issue is probably the most critical thing in concern, and that really does boil down to the legal frameworks which are being deployed within each one of the countries. And even within sort of areas like the EU, it's not uniform from country to country. I will say that even though from a legal perspective, certainly from the privacy side of things is one thing, but there's still cultural issues which I think Andy touched on earlier on as well. Just because you're legally allowed to do it doesn't mean that you necessarily will be invited to do it by your subscribers. Lack of skills is still obviously a big issue. The technology and understanding of how that's going to be implemented seem to come up as quite a major constraint in terms of the actual technologies and systems in play with that. And we can hark back to the discussion we had about applications versus more general systems. And of course, applications do lend themselves to helping support that particular fundamental issue. And I suppose the other sort of critical bit on this, and just an observation we've done to the market, there are many possible use cases for big data and analytics, and many of these are on sort of pilot stage at the moment. But the business cases aren't always sufficiently worked out, and it's still pretty much early days. And I'd say that there's still work to be done, shall we say, in terms of thrashing out which particular business case is going to work best. But certainly the ones which are orientated towards revenue generation are going to be ones which go towards the top of the stack, opposed to more esoteric ones in terms of having potential in terms of getting way through the CFO and other such financial requirements. So we're just going to move on to looking at some of the other areas which Andy's going to take back, which is looking at giving some customers incentives.
Yes, so clearly with the regulatory environment and what's socially acceptable, it's very important for operators to take privacy issues very seriously, and certainly can't do some of these applications without getting customers to opt in. And so what can an operator do to overcome its customers' concerns and encourage them to opt in for use of personal data for marketing and other purposes? This slide shows some conclusions from the World Economic Forum and Boston Consulting Group and the Mobile Marketing Association, and they're essentially advocating that a new approach is needed. They're saying it's no longer okay to expect customers to opt in once at sign-up time for use of their personal data for marketing simply by ticking a box on a website. Instead, they say that customers need to be engaged in understanding how their personal data is used and how value is created, and they need to get some of that value for themselves. So really this comes down to two things. It's about giving customers incentives to opt in and giving them control. So firstly, customers need some incentives. They need to see some value to opting in, and that's not just a one-time thing. They need to, it's possible to give customers a reason to opt in at the beginning, but they need to continue seeing value. And in order to be happy to stay opted in. So this is where real-time big data analytics and context awareness can help essentially by making sure that customers have a good experience. So they only receive relevant ads and offers, and they only receive these at appropriate times. So in other words, this good mobile marketing experience is designed to encourage them to stay. They don't get spammed with all kinds of irrelevant things, and they don't get bothered when they're not interested. But there's an interesting paradox here, because in order to deliver this better experience, operators need to use a lot more personal information so that they can target the offers more accurately. And for many, that might be seen as a greater invasion of privacy. So the assumption here, the theory here, is that subscribers will only object if they don't like the experience they're getting, and if they're enjoying it, they won't mind so much if more of their personal data is being used, because it actually helps them. They don't get bothered with irrelevant things. But this is not enough on its own. It's quite clear that the second piece is also needed, control by the end customer. So they need to be able to opt out if they don't like what they're getting, and they need to be able to opt out in real time. There's nothing more annoying than opting out and still receiving those marketing campaigns. So that's another reason why making sure the systems truly operate in real time is a vital part of delivering a good customer experience. There is one other thing actually to mention on this topic, which is that it's possible for operators to give customers much more direct benefit from all the data that they're processing with their big data platforms. So one example of that is being used by China Mobile in Sichuan province. They're offering customers direct access to the detail of which applications on their phones are generating which data charges on their bills. This is usually quite a difficult thing for operators to know, and generates some quite difficult calls to the call centre about bill data transparency. In this case, though, China Mobile is able to take the initiative, and they can not only tell customers exactly which applications generated which charges, but they can also warn customers about apps that they perhaps haven't used very much yet, but that would create high data charges if the customer started to use them more. So with this much more informed and proactive approach, giving customers access to that data, China Mobile, just in one province in Sichuan, has eliminated some 30,000 complaints annually about non-transparency of mobile data bills. Those calls were typically quite difficult to answer in the past, and now they're eliminated.
Okay, we sort of come to the sort of formal run-through of the program, and just, I suppose, picking up a couple of observations as we conclude where we're at. So I would say that big data analytics is on the agenda of pretty much every CSP today, and there are, I suppose, the expectations from the survey were that they're certainly expecting results in the long term to take place. Having said that, there are plenty of examples now, and Andy's been through a few here, in the short term where there are certainly the more forward-thinking operators are trying to get ahead of the crowd, if you like, and start implementing those today. And even from the implementation side of the questioning we did within the survey, it certainly it would be possibly dangerous for operators not to start considering, at least, how to implement some of this new technology and derive some value from it in the shorter term. It's still early days, though, and operators are still needing to understand what tools are out there and the business potential. And certainly, there is some, I would put the word confusion in, that's probably not quite the right terminology, but effectively there's still an understanding to be had as to the full potential of big data analytics and the tools related and applications related to it. and to a certain extent there's some experimentation which is going on within those tool sets, and that's certainly been the genre of activity to date. The ability to really take full advantage of the big data and analytics which are available today, I think will revolve around the ability to build solid applications which have been well thought through, and that will, I'm quite sure, lead to vendors stepping up, like AsiaInfo and others, to build those sort of applications to help them on that journey and utilising it. There are, of course, these issues. We touched on data privacy. These are regional and indeed down to country level, and we've got to be extremely aware of that. And there is a relationship which must be maintained, which Andy went through. Mustn't scare people with too much familiarity, but nonetheless, you're cajoling and providing a context-aware offer is going to make a massive difference to the uptake of those offers and ultimately to your bottom line. The other observation, which we didn't really cover on, but it's a part of the skill sets which need to drive these things, and one of the advantages of maybe adopting an application approach is that traditional approaches whereby using generic tools use and utilize some very clever people to do clever data manipulation, understanding of what goes on within the models, etc. And the ability to have the business staff actually do that for them from a business perspective is going to enable those sorts of applications to be far more successful within the marketplace. So you're not relying on heavy skill set people who have to understand the data, but really looking at the business issues. And the tools which enable those sorts of staff to do their jobs will, of course, ultimately, I think, result in a better result from the operator's perspective. And I suppose one other final thought from an applications perspective is that clearly, there is an understanding and within the market space that if you adopt an application approach, it should be quicker, easier, and faster to implement. That's the theory behind it. Of course, all these things I'm quite sure can be tweaked and changed, and not everyone's exactly the same. But certainly, the ethos of the approach of an application and associated integrated appliances which go with those will provide the ability for operators to quickly and swiftly get onto these new big data related applications and get the business benefits out of doing those. We're going to hand over over to the questions, and so if you've not already done so, please put your questions in the box on the left-hand side of the screens, and we will get on to those right now.